a week of thank you so much. We're going to get started with the recording. Um, and thank you so much to all of you for being here, especially those who have been around for 2 weeks now for this session about the federal funding freeze. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So Alex or Hannah, can y'all see the presentation? Okay, awesome. So wait a minute, we got to go back to I I really want us to come to this evening's gathering with some intentionality about being slow. That's an invitation that I received from someone that I really, really admire and respect a lot. So to the extent that I can, and this is really not fully within my natural pace of speaking, but for the purposes of all of the nervous systems on this webinar, I'm going to try to speak very slowly. So if you fall asleep, that means I'm doing my job well. But I'm Dania Davy, and I run a consultancy, Land and Liberation, and you're here today for office hours. And I'm really, really grateful that I have folks that have supported my ability to host these office hours, both in helping me cover the time that it takes to prepare, as well as, like I said, Farm Aid. Thank you so much for extending the offering of allowing us to use this much bigger space so that more folks have access to the information. So just quickly, we're now at the welcome. This is kind of the flow for this evening. We will have a grounding activity, and then I'll review some of the resources. I've put a lot of resources on the 2025 Funding Freeze website. So I want to kind of go through those and help better orient folks to what those resources entail and how it could impact and help you pay attention to the issues that are affecting folks trying to access federal resources. I'm going to do a super quick overview of where we are with the litigation. We're going to take a restorative pause before going into the Q&A. We got a lot of questions submitted beforehand, so those are all kind of prepared already to go into, but I'm going to invite you throughout our time together to continue to add questions to the chat box, and those are all being compiled. If there are questions that don't get answered, we're continuing to just update those. And I'll try to keep the ones that don't have any kind of vulnerable or identifying information on the 2025 funding freeze website as well, so that it's kind of going to become an FAQ for folks to be able to refer to. I historically have not recorded office hours, but this one and a couple of the ones coming up will likely be recorded, especially for the substantive issues, the litigation review, the legal issues. But I do try to hold the Q&A space for a place where primarily these office hours are for farmers. And so making sure that if folks do have specific questions about a grant application or a loan application, that all of that is the privacy is preserved. We're going to spend a good amount of time talking about next steps because I think that we're in the moment where some really thoughtful collaborative action is due, and I think we've all been kind of wanting that to occur. And so we're going to talk through some ways to make that happen before going into the closing. So for our grounding exercise, just bear with me one moment.
We'll get started. Bringing your hands to your kneecaps or your lap and taking the first deep breath in through our nose and out through our mouth, closing our eyes. Again, follow your breath, taking a deep inhale through your nose and out through your mouth. Follow your breath, taking another deep inhale through your nose and exhaling through your mouth. And observe the breath. Sometimes we notice that our breathing is not as deep as we thought it was. We might be breathing shallow breaths throughout the day. So how can you take more notice of what it feels like right now to be breathing as deeply as you are? Now we're going to hold our breath for a beat at the top. Taking a deep inhale through our nose, inhaling 1, 2, 3, 4, holding our breath 1, 2, 3, 4, and exhaling 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, inhale through your nose 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold that breath 1, 2, 3, 4, and release 1, 2, 3, 4. Allow your breath to return to its natural rhythm and see how it feels now that you're breathing deeply at the top of your head. Bring your awareness and your attention to the top of your head. If there's tension in your forehead, how can you take a deep breath in and out and feel tension release there? Sometimes you might be holding tension because of concern or worry, scrunching our forehead. So send some breath and awareness there. Take another deep inhale and continue to bring your awareness down your body as we do this progressive relaxation technique known as body scanning. Bringing our awareness now to our cheeks. Maybe it was a day of smiling, a day of talking a lot. How can you bring your attention there and release any tension that might be there in your jawline? Continuing to follow your breath, taking a deep inhale in and exhaling. Bring your awareness down from your jaw to your throat. How can you send a deep breath there? And upon exhaling, feel the tension release from your throat. Maybe there was words unsaid that you might be holding in from the day. How can you feel that tension relax there in your throat? Continuing to make your awareness graze down your body, and while it does so, releasing any tension, stress that we might be carrying in our body. Now in our shoulders. It's so common that we hike up our shoulders. Maybe because of cold, maybe because of tenseness. How can you send a deep breath there and feel your shoulders release and come down? Feel your neck elongate. Continuing to bring your attention down your body, down your spine, to your sits bones, and send a deep breath there. Oftentimes, focusing at the base of our body helps us feel grounded. So take a deep inhale through your nose and exhale, sending a big breath there, feeling the tension, release, feeling ourselves sink into the earth, feeling ourselves grounded in this moment. Continuing to bring our awareness down our thighs, down our calves, into our ankles, to our toes, to our feet in contact with the floor maybe, and send a deep breath there, really feeling yourself grounded in this moment, Again, take a deep inhale through your nose, the deepest that you've taken all day, and releasing the deepest exhale of all day. when you're ready, bring your attention back to your surroundings, away from your breath. But know that you can always come back here. Open your eyes. And thank you for taking the time to tune into yourself, to tune into your breath, to feel grounded in this moment. I'm Anissa Benitez, and I appreciate you.
I needed that. So now I wanted to start to explore and to help orient folks that have been reviewing the emails, but maybe there were just so many emails. Like it wasn't just emails, there were just so many um, bad news bombs dropped on us this week. And like I said, I wasn't originally going to have office hours this week because, all of us have been kind of inundated with so much information, and I was kind of weighing the pros and cons about adding to the information that folks are consuming. But I did want to make sure that at the very least for folks that did have urgent issues that have come up, and we're going to get to some of those in the Q&A section. But I wanted to make sure that folks were oriented towards resources that are available and some of the ones that I made specifically for this moment that we're all in together. So on my website, for the Land and Liberation website, I added this link to 2025 federal funding. And if you click that link, it takes you to this page, the green page. And one of the resources on this page that I wanted to just spend a little bit of time with was on this executive order tracking page. And I want to spend a little bit of time with this ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing, because I kind of wanted to highlight this document was actually something I was just collecting for myself because I'm a nerd. And then other folks started to say that, like folks that I had shared it with thought that it was useful for the various purposes that were relevant to the work that they do. And so I just opened it up. And so originally, I don't even know how decipherable it was to folks. So I just acknowledge and apologize that sharing a resource that isn't like there aren't directions or there's no mapping, may not necessarily be the best. And so I kind of wanted to just walk you through my thought process here. And the reason I wanted to look at this one in particular is this is kind of the one that is really driving a lot of what we saw unfold this week. This is the one that targets quote unquote DEI hires, and the purpose and the implementation that's identified is to coordinate the termination of all what they term discriminatory programs, and they call DEI diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. They call that illegal. And if you scroll down on that one, they talk about terminating to the maximum extent allowed by law all DEI, DEIA, and quote, environmental justice offices and positions. That's where we've seen some of the layoffs and the administrative um, uh, pauses on professional staff, federal employees in the government. And so I know at least one of the issues that folks have encountered in trying to get answers about the status of their programs, their grant awards, their cooperative agreements. At least some of that is connected to the ways in which federal employees have been bullied and targeted and pressured really to leave their positions of expertise within the implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act, environmental and climate and under-resourced community programs. So this one starts out talking about the staffing changes, and we've already seen how those staffing changes have had a direct impact on the ability of farmers and community-based organizations that support them to access not just financial resources, but information, even communicating with folks, not knowing whether your program officer has been put on administrative leave or terminated. All of those not funding, but employment decisions were impacted by this one in particular. I also wanted to point out that there are some that kind of try to cover multiple areas of ground. So I also highlighted some of the immigration based executive orders, and that's because there's sometimes language that can spill over into those of us that support communities. Rural communities have every type of person living in them, and so when there are phrases like sanctuary jurisdictions being identified and those supporting sanctuary jurisdictions, those orders are so broad and vague that, you know, if we're supporting folks who are within the food system that happen to be also within the immigration system, there's significant scrutiny coming down on our community-based organizations that support vulnerable communities. And so I just wanted to point out that I tried to highlight the language in the executive orders that might be relevant in your own evaluation of how your program might be impacted, because there's a lot of information that we just do not have access to. And so also in this one, that's called Ending Illegal Discrimination and Restoring Merit-Based Opportunity. That one talks about specifically looking from the executive branch, the head of each agency will include new contract and grant terms. And they're also going through and removing any references to quote DEI and DEIA principles. And then they have the words terminate all diversity, equity, equitable decision making, equitable deployment of financial and technical assistance, advancing equity, and like mandates, requirements, programs, or activities as appropriate. So for those who were here last week, I spent a little bit of time talking about what an executive order is. And so I just wanted to show that, you know, the document can have immediate impact on not just the staffing issues, but the way that those staff perform their jobs or whether or not they even have a job. And as you can imagine, regardless of the intentional withholding of resources, some of which is occurring, the impact on the staffing of government agents is something that we've seen create a lot of confusion and misunderstanding and conflicting information making its way to our communities. And then I did want to move into a litigation update. I do have on that 2025 page a litigation tracker, but I've pulled out on its own page some of the relevant documents to the litigation that is most significantly impacting the programs within USDA and EPA. So last Friday, as we were meeting, It was filed last Friday for the U.S. District Court for the District of Rhode Island. And this is that second temporary restraining order. And they're saying that it would mirror a preliminary injunction. And so what that document does is that it tells the federal government exactly what they are not able to do. And in this case, this judge talks pretty significantly about the breadth of the executive orders and their potential to cause irreparable harm. And then with the second, well, actually, this one that was filed within the U.S. District Court in D.C. is actually an extension of that very first temporary restraining order that we saw go out. And this one, the judge has really strong language, signed a really strong order, and they state that there's no action whatsoever within what has been outlined and planned by the executive branch that can continue in light of the irreparable harm there. And so I want to highlight for you all, like it's really, really clear. The judge says that defendants are enjoined, so that means they cannot implement, give effect to, or reinstate under different names any of the directives in that OMB quote unquote pause memo with respect to disbursement of federal funds. They're also saying that written notice should be given to those agencies to let them know that they can't implement, give effect to, or reinstate that pause memo. And it's just can't be clearer that the judges are aware that those efforts that have come up once could replicate themselves under other names. And so both of those judges laid out very clearly that the government is under no authority to continue to withhold funding. I did see some, okay, some folks are saying that there's a button on the website that says access denied. So I'll update that. Thanks for pointing that out. That's a helpful point to know. And yeah, I think that was a lot. So we know that there are some resources there to help you kind of make sense of which executive orders might be impacting programs that matter to you, and especially that the language, diversity, equity, inclusion are specifically being highlighted. And I just wanted to say before we go into our first restorative pause that for me, I have really been thinking a lot about the fact that even though a lot of the media makes it seem like randomly every day there's just something random that's happening. And I wanted to remind folks that there's nothing that's random about the executive orders, the memos, the decisions that are being made. This is a part of a 40-plus-year strategy since the Reagan administration to maintain capitalism, ideals from colonization, white supremacy, patriarchy, heteronormativity. And we're affirmed in our knowledge that our work for the past 40 years towards building solidarity, towards building equity, towards moving from ideas of fairness that are amorphous and vague to ideas of equity, where there are definitions, where there are legal standards, where there's regulations put in place to ensure that those communities who have historically intentionally been excluded from accessing federal resources can make some catch up in getting access to those resources. And so I think it's really important that whenever we're hearing something that we care about coming under attack, people do not attack things that are not working because it's unnecessary to attack something that's ineffective. So if we were not actually building solidarity, if we weren't actually achieving real changes in the ways people understand our human impact on the earth, our human impact on the climate, that there's a difference between climate and weather, that there's a difference between biological sex and gender, that there's a difference between a socially constructed racial identity and any kind of biological differences between us, and that there's no difference between the Americans that deserve merit and the Americans that deserve equity. I think that their pattern of putting all of these things together, but really calling out our strengths and really identifying our collective power is a major affirmation. And that's not to make light of the fact that many of us are having real concerns about accessing resources because those are our tax dollars and our government reports to us in a democratic nation. And so they're accountable to us whether or not we elected a particular candidate. They represent us if we live in their district or work in their district. And so the ways in which the programs that matter to the communities that we really care about are the specific ones that are coming under attack. I think we should all remember that that's a real big indication that the most violent, aggressive, fascist administration in this country's history recognizes our power as a threat. The fact that some of us in our organizations are being highlighted and poured over in their behind closed doors meetings, um, that shows our power. And I just want to remind us that so much of what they have done has been under cover of night, behind closed doors, in meetings where only people who look a particular way and share a particular set of ideals can actively participate in the conversation. And everything we've been doing has been out in the light, and every connection that we've been making has been where our light shines light on each other's light. I just feel like we're really living the proof of our ancestors' wisdom and everything that they survived and bore witness to pass on in our DNA, and that we were able to find each other in this moment and to call our government and hold it accountable to the communities that we live in and that we love. I just want to remind us that 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 is that is what we're we're founding a new America, and they're identifying us as enemies of the state that they've created in their minds, but that they don't have ownership of our collective beauty, strength, resiliency. And so, with that, I just want to take a really quick restorative pause, get some water, and then we'll come back for a little bit more information about some more resources.
is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned. Everywhere is war. It's a war that until they're no longer first class and second class citizens of any nation, until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes. Miss a war that until the basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all without regard to race. This a war that until that day, the dream of lasting peace, world citizenship, rule of international morality will remaining but a fleeting illusion to be pursued but never attained. Now everywhere is war, war, and until
So I don't know if you all knew this, but yesterday would have been Bob Marley's 80th birthday. I don't know. Maybe I'm too woo-woo right now, but I just feel like all of these things are not coincidences. Like it's Black History Month and birthdays of Langston Hughes and significant civil rights icons. Rosa Parks were a part of this moment that we're in. And so I'm hoping that you can hear by how I'm describing um, all of these things that I feel I, I I definitely understand that we're in a moment of a lot of exhaustion, and I think that there are going to be um, really, really big opportunities for us to hold each other. And sometimes you're going to be stepping forward, sometimes you're going to be stepping backward. And those of us who, when we do have the capacity to share all of the full range of our gifts, I think this is an invitation to remember that. And I was really excited when I saw that a lot of folks, as they were registering, put in that they were available and ready to pray or chant. So I've been listening to a lot of Bob. I've been listening to Chanting Down Babylon a lot. And just to know that our ancestors wrote these love songs for our movement, for us, to us, and we have access to them. It's all confirmation that we have everything we need, and we have things to inspire others who haven't necessarily seen the connections between the movements. I think that a lot of folks forget that the environmental justice movement began in rural North Carolina. And so there's just so many ways in which there's interconnection between the support that we provide to farmers, the anti corporate consolidation work that we do, the farm bill work that we do, all of the advocacy work that we do, all of the training, advocacy training work that NSAC and RAPI and National Young Farmers and Land Laws and Flag and Rural Coalition and Federation of Southern Cooperatives have done to get folks prepared for the Farm Bill, it turns out those skills are going to be really transferable to this current moment. And so I'm really, really excited that we're here together. And I did want to also remind us that we do have networks of people who stand ready to support the work that we've been building towards. And so, with that being said, I did want to pivot towards the questions because, as I said, this week was a week where, despite the fact that the DC District Court imposed a temporary restraining order on the federal government, and just to be clear, that temporary restraining order was supposed to have the effect of stopping any government agencies from pausing the resources that were supposed to make their way into our communities. Almost immediately on Monday, I started receiving calls from community organizations and farmers and all sorts of folks who were having trouble accessing their portals, were getting error messages, were having difficulty getting any communication from their program officers. And then I confirmed with folks that I work with in the environmental justice space, and there's so much data being removed from EPA's website that they weren't even able to log into their portal at all. And folks were having trouble identifying whether it was a glitch in the website or or if that website was just no longer available. And I was in a meeting yesterday with the Environmental Protection Network, and they assisted a lot of groups that were applying for the EPA's community change grants. And they reported that none of the groups that they were in conversation with have access to any of the funds. And that continues to this day, that they don't have access to their funds. And so that's a very similar communication that we've also received. And before we go to the Q&A, because I kind of wanted to add this to the conversation within the Q&A, I did send out, and maybe you didn't see it because there've been a lot of emails that have gone out, but I'll put in the chat. And this is an action that one effort of that email was just to make sure that you all were aware that there are currently USDA staff that have been and are being placed on administrative leave. And those buzzwords that I pointed out in those executive orders, diversity, equity, inclusion, environmental justice, if folks are in any way being identified as part of supporting organizations doing that work, continuing to release those funds. I know there were it kind of depended on who the particular boss was in a particular agency's chain of command. Things were getting released on a case by case basis. And then today we found out that USDA staff that had been trying to kind of continue to work in compliance with the law that requires that the government pay timely, as well as their civil rights responsibilities, plus the fact that, we've been building this movement across the government, across the country, across party lines. And so we do have folks that are careerist within various federal agencies. And now those folks, by the nature of them believing in the new America that's a place of equity and environmental justice and access to resources for the communities that have been historically excluded and divested of, those folks are now possibly losing their jobs, possibly being placed on administrative leave. And so I preface the Q&A with that statement because I have been assisting some folks with trying to get answers to questions about grant applications. And there are issues with getting information from USDA because of some of the employment decisions that have been made throughout the agency. So several of the questions did speak to the availability of specific resources, and I will go through the questions that came in, but I just kind of, as a preliminary matter, wanted to lay the expectation that not only are we being told by folks that have grant awards, cooperative agreements from the government, that they're not being able to draw down those funds or be reimbursed for those contracts. We're also being told on the USDA EPA side, a lot of the customer service folks, a lot of the folks that were, trying to make sure that those funds were making their way into our communities, are losing their jobs or being threatened about losing their jobs in this moment. So getting a lot of specific answers continues to be a challenge despite the court process. And so that's why when we go into the next steps part of the conversation, I really wanted us to be thinking holistically about some of the solutions that this moment will need. Because even though we do have court orders in place, there's still significant illegal action taking place throughout our government under this new administration. So I'm going to ask that the recording be stopped as we go into Q&A. Disorienting towards my nervous system. And so I just want to say that if you have any experience with violence, psychological terrorism, psychological trauma, it's fair to say that we all have at this point. But some of us are more so working through challenges and healing from that type of trauma. And so this is pretty much like blatant white supremacist sociopathic violence in the language. But I want to share it because I want you to hear part of the strategy that is publicly being disclosed as laid out by the new head of the Office of Management and Budget, which is kind of at the heart of all of this federal funding freeze conversation.
Democrats to be traumatically affected. We want, when they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. We want their funding to be shut down so that the EPA can't do all of the rules against our energy industry because they have no bandwidth financially to do so. We want to put them in trauma.
So I do apologize for those of you that I might have inadvertently or indirectly traumatized. It's very upsetting for me. This entire time, and part of why I wasn't going to host this today. Oh, sorry, I forgot to pause it. Part of why I wasn't going to host this week is that, like I've done a lot of work in therapy and in community, and I have a really tight family, chosen family. And I feel like I'm like finally in a place in my life where I'm really healthy. Um, and I definitely have my bad days, and like I just mean like relatively, right? Like so like relatively in my life, I feel like I'm in a healthy place. And some of some of the news for me has brought me back to being a small child and as an immigrant, as a coming here from another country. And during the 80s, being Jamaican was like super not awesome. I know now it's like all cool and stuff. Living in Central Florida in the 80s as an immigrant from the Caribbean was not it. And I guess I just kind of suppressed a lot of those memories. Um, and man, like I've done all the reparenting myself and I saw it and I was like on camera in a group where everybody was on camera and I like immediately started crying because it was like to hear that, a lot of times you hear that it's like people are just like incidentally, institutionally racist. And you just do not think about the fact that there are people laughing at jokes made about specifically traumatizing um when you experience invisible illness, there are times when um it just feels like regular things can make you feel very sensitive and emotional. Um, and just hearing people name that they want to cause you harm is very, very hard to hear. And um, and they're talking about us and they're talking about the communities that we care about, and they're saying that they want they want us to feel that way. It's hard to hear. And so for me, I see that as an opportunity to continue to extend love and light and remember that a lot of what our next steps need to be is to remember that as much as we're fighting for funding, because those are our tax dollars, and this is our democratic system that works for us. This is why we're also trying to build something new and different and invite solidarity and community and makes no room for violence, um, because we hold each other up so deeply at the sources of our shared humanity that there isn't any room for things like that to make its way. And so one of the next steps is for us to really limit how much media we consume. And so what I've part of why there's like an entire website and additional like links and resources that I've been working on is it's almost feels like it's a bit inescapable to not have to consume the media. But we have a choice. We have the choice to not consume these narratives of chaos and destabilization. And what it reminded me specifically of was um, remembering the day that I decided to not let um, someone who was determined to cause me a lot of harm and stop me from doing the work that I was put here to do. And I committed to myself that I was never going to stop doing the work that matters to me. And it really only matters that we rely on each other and that we build this community to the point where we all have spaces to hold each other So we're not doing the work of keeping this government going to try to salvage what's left of late stage capitalism. Um, it's giving me the ick. All of the isms are giving me the ick. And for me, the solution is what our ancestors have invited us into the light that they've created for us. And so the first next step is for us to divest our attention from media that um, obfuscates the reality that all of this is intentional. It's not accidental. It's not incompetence. It's deliberate action. And we have deliberately been building love, and we have deliberately been building solidarity, and we have deliberately been thinking about ways to step up and step back and build relationships that can withstand any level of pressure. And this is just the time for us to really create that new world because so many of us want the alternative to what that video looked like. And so the first next step I want to invite folks into is to be just really mindful about consuming and sharing media. Um, and whenever it does impact you, to feel that and not brush it away, um, and to remember that we have an agenda too, and that we have been transforming our societies and our communities as well. And we have work to do to implement our agenda. And so we just literally do not have time for the haters. I know Kendrick is having his moment, but like it's not hater season right now. Like it's lover girl season. And so I want to just invite us to think of all the ways that we can show each other love in this work so that this work is not just work that we love to do, but it is, we're giving love to each other in the way that we work together towards our goals. Um, that said, there are groups that have not yet seen this resource, and I'll also put it in the chat. Lawyers for Good Government is uh, is hosting a fund protection clinic, and they are offering to help groups that have contracts with the government review their contracts so that they can help assess what their next best steps are. And I know that they've been inundated with requests, and so one of the resources that I know that they're sharing out with groups. I'm going to put it in the chat as well, because one of those resources is this document, which is just a fantastic document. And the reason that I'm also sharing it in the chat is earlier I said we kind of do, a lot of times I'm like, why did I go to law school? Like, it's so boring. But this is a moment where like that documentation piece, like we talk to our farmers all the time, like documentation and all the compliance and everything, but like really, really, we have to move with a spirit of litigation right now. And the biggest key to being successful with litigation is when we have the receipts. So one thing that I want to encourage you, if you are supporting a community-based organization or a farmer that is having trouble accessing their resources, is to use some version of this template. It's really well written. I think that it's really an opportunity for us to send that letter or email, or when you call and you read that to the person that you're communicating with, that we're writing down every incident, every interaction. We're creating our own receipts for services because when certain groups will have to move forward into the litigation path to get these resources into our communities, we don't want attorneys asking them to go and compile and try to remember and find everything. We kind of want to have like that notebook on deck and ready to roll. Because I do anticipate that a big part of our next steps will be considering if any of the pending litigation is the right litigation for our organizations to either join, or there are legal documents that you can file in support of a particular party's position. The Federation went through this, so I feel like I do have some like direct personal knowledge about some of what we need to gather. And so I've put out, I know that folks have been reaching out to Lawyers for Good Government, and I encourage you to continue to do so because they're determined to help as many people as they can. And I've also reached out to all of my networks of attorneys from law school, from my Skadden fellowship, from my friends, and just asked folks, even if they're not litigators, to help with compliance reviews, because that's the other next step, is that your organization should be looking at its digital security, its insurance, security nets, as well as its compliance with any documents, any contracts with the government, and just making sure that the executive level staff of that organization knows what all of those things mean. Like usually those contracts from the government were a lot of pages. There's a lot to sign. So now's a really good time to get an attorney to sit down with you and make sure that you actually understand what everything says, because we are kind of moving into a moment where we have to think about what if we were questioned on the stand about something that we signed. And that is a part of the process. So think like a litigator and document as much as you can. And then in terms of continuing to remain coordinated as a movement, one of the things that we within the movement ecosystem are trying to collect are, I've spoken to so many executive directors and staff that are extremely stretched. I think it's the most polite way to say it. And I really think that, because part of their intention is for our leaders to not want to go to work in the morning, it's really important for us to have some space for knowledge and wisdom sharing amongst our executive directors. And so we are trying to convene some space for that, so that folks can think about, like, what does leadership that's coordinated, what does coordinated bravery in this moment look like for our movement? But also, what does that intergenerational transfer of knowledge and wisdom? I mean, I only know anything that I know because of, the Ben Burkess, the Shirley Sherrods, like the folks who and the Janella Holmes, the Cornelius Planning that educated me, Savvy Horn, like uh so I shouldn't have started listing names, because just like literally every movement leader has like pulled me aside at some point in the course of my career and poured into me. And so we need to have both, like, the like continued access to their wisdom and brilliance, but also next generation, inviting ways to work the way that Gen Z and millennials and all of that stuff, like we move, we're scared of phone calls. So we're gonna have to meet in the middle somewhere in this communication, and this is like one way that we want to coordinate some of that work. And then this other document is also for folks who are in the nonprofit uh, community supporting farmers in rural communities, and it's the coordinated bravery intake form. I would say, in the context of this conversation, that there are a couple of balls that we cannot afford to drop. We need nonprofit staff able to do their job deliverables so they can stay compliant. We need executive directors being able to coordinate strategies around emergency funding and urgent funding requests, so that they can continue to provide leadership and guidance to keep our organizations compliant. and none of those people can afford to take on a whole nother job right now. And so one of the things that we need to be thinking is, how do we make sure? I mentioned the ways that we need to educate Congress. We need to educate them about not rescinding this funding, not filing, not passing laws that would undermine this funding and the programs that it is invested in. But we also need to make sure that we're paying attention to the appropriations process, and we need to make sure, right? Like, it's like the laundry list, but as relates to the funding freeze, the appropriations process needs to be monitored. Congress not rescinding the funding needs to be monitored, as well as possibly pushing them to pass legislation to overturn the enforcement of some of these executive orders. So and I didn't even mention the Farm Bill because not right now. There's a time and a place. But those three major pieces of congressional education, um, that's no one's job yet. And so it has to be the movement's work. So that is going to need to be like a campaign, is how do we keep Congress educated and accountable to their constituents? Another thing I've already mentioned is funding. Hopefully, some of that can come from the communal learning and the cohort of executive directors, how to approach funding cooperatively. And we have been in this movement. I don't know if you've been in the movement for at least a year, then you probably know that everybody is not BFFs. And that is not a secret in any community, right? And I think that sometimes we think that like our movement has more like dirty laundry or family secrets or whatever, but like the reality of community and building community and coalition and solidarity is it's messy, and everyone doesn't like everyone. Some people are shady to other people. Like, there's all the things that exist in any community exist in our movement. And so we cannot pretend that those things don't exist, because that will just lead to fragile, extractive relationships that perpetuates individualism, which ultimately advances capitalism. And then we'll only be reacting to try to preserve what's left over of late stage capitalism. So since that's over with, we really need to figure out, like, how do we have those conversations about funding that are non-extractive? And I think that we have a great opportunity right now to think really creatively about what that can look like. We need a media campaign. There are folks that are getting invited to participate in media requests. It would be great if we have some coordination around the messaging that we're using in media, and we have folks that are prepared to talk to media. I know some folks are too vulnerable, or the threat of doxing is real. The threat of all of these things are real. My father's cell phone was called by someone looking for me. So it's very real that, like, these choices to preserve our movement have risks. And so we will need folks that are prepared to interact with the media in ways that are um, protecting others while always protecting whoever's willing to have those conversations. We also need a coordinated conversation around how do we educate our boards and our staff about these changes, especially when most of us just learn terms like impoundment and, and the rescission of federal funding like this month. How do we keep staff informed so that they're not having to go to the mainstream media, get overwhelmed about the information, keep boards informed so that if an organization does get to the point where it does have to file litigation, the board isn't the reason for a delay. And then also, how do we have the conversation about what our movement's leadership could look like? And so some of those things are laid out on that coordinated bravery strategy conversation. And I'm just naming that we have an opportunity here to really put into practice what a solidarity economy for our movement could look like and our communities. And that's our power. That's our superpower is we have each other and we have decades in this game. So much expertise that we have the upper hand. Like it's like we have all the cheat codes. So it's just a matter of everyone's nervous systems being calm enough that we can actually like remember. Like I call Edna like every day, like just to get like a I feel you, sis. You know, or like a Shay. Like we all have to have like our little phone trees of how to stay, you know, uh regulated. So this resource is just one of the ways for us to start to coordinate those things so that we don't have to all be doing everything everywhere all at once. I can trust that Alex and Hannah are holding this piece down. Charlotte and Jen are holding that piece down. So this is just an invitation for us to cultivate containers for work that needs to be continued that's not currently funded or supported or staffed, so that we can all share this opportunity of this moment together. And with that, we're the part of the evening that I always like I need on a Friday evening and especially on this Friday evening. And so this time, last time I didn't know how to get it to work, but this time I figured out how to get it to work. So if you want to come on camera, I'm going to be sharing a song. As you all know, I'm originally from the Caribbean. I'm a big fan of soca music, which reggae is like Bob Marley. It's very like, you know, down with the man, down with capitalism. And then soca is just like a vibe, like it's just vibes. So like if you're ever having a bad day, and I'm gonna put these songs on the page too, but like when I'm working out and I'm really tired and I'm like getting to the last set, I will turn on soca and like bang out 10 more reps. So that's my word of endorsement. And this song is called Family. And I hope you can understand the words. The accent is really thick, but basically this song is just a celebration that, you know, you don't have to be biologically family to be a family. And I think our movement knows that very, very well. So I just want to, in 1 second, share family with you and we're going to dance it out and then we're going to hop off. So give me 1 second to set up the video. I have to figure out how to optimize the audio because you're not getting all the bass and the notes. Um, it's okay. We're gonna do it. So just give me 1 second to optimize the audio because you gotta hear the you gotta hear it.